You ever notice how schools have more rules than actual education? I mean, the average school probably has enough regulations to run a small country. And not a fun country either. One of those places where the national anthem is probably a bell ringing every 45 minutes. You walk into a school and before you even see a classroom, there's a list of rules the size of a grocery receipt. No running, no shouting, no chewing gum, no hats, no phones, no fun. It's like the first lesson of the day is obedience. Forget math. You're being trained for the grand adventure of standing in line and asking permission to breathe. And you ever wonder how these rules got there? Nobody ever explains that part. Somewhere in the distant past, a group of adults must have gathered in a conference room and said, "We need a policy for every possible human behavior." You just know the conversation went like, what about kids who try to climb out the window? Write it down. Hey, what about kids who wear flip-flops? What about kids who try to microwave aluminum foil? Now write it down twice. Because here's the truth. Every single rule in a school exists because somebody did something stupid. You'll never find a rule that came out of logic. It came out of panic. Somebody, somewhere, decided that if one kid tried to do a backflip off the cafeteria table, then the entire school population must now live under the no backflips policy. One kid ruins it for everyone, and suddenly the principal's got a megaphone and a clipboard like he's running NASA. And the signs, oh my God, the signs. You can't take 5 steps in a school without bumping into some laminated threat. All pass required. Authorized personnel only. This door is alarmed. Yeah, well, so are the students. Don't enter. Stay to the right, walk, don't run. You start to feel like you're in an airport that only flies to disappointment. But they always say it's for your safety. Everything in a school is for your safety. You can't wear a hat for your safety. You can't have a soda for your safety. You can't go to the bathroom during announcements for your safety. What are they protecting you from, a wild math problem? There's something funny about how adults think danger lurks behind every desk. You'd think schools were built on an ancient burial ground the way they treat every hallway like a potential lawsuit. And you can't question the rules either. Oh, no. You try to ask why a rule exists and suddenly you're a troublemaker. Why can't I wear a hoodie? Because it's against the dress code. Why is it against the dress code? Because I said so. Why did you say so? Detention, that's not discipline, that's dictatorship. If a teacher can't explain the rule shouldn't exist. That should be a rule. But schools don't run on logic. They run on fear. The fear of chaos. The fear of one kid coloring outside the lines. The fear that if left unchecked, students will start thinking for themselves. Because once that happens, the whole system collapses. Can't have a kid realizing the rules might not make sense. That's the first step to independence. And independence doesn't fit neatly into a binder. Let's talk about the dress code for a second. Now, this is where the comedy really writes itself. Dress codes always start noble. We want a respectful environment. Then 2 meetings later, they're measuring sock height and banning t-shirts with cartoon characters. You know you've gone too far when an adult is holding a ruler up to a teenager's knee. Excuse me, young lady, that skirt is 1 inch above regulation length. Oh, come on. It's not the Pentagon. It's a hallway with lockers and gum stuck to the floor. And there's always that line they love to say. We're preparing you for the real world. Really, the real world. Because last I checked, in the real world, people wear flip-flops to work, chew gum in meetings, and talk on their phones during lunch. The only place where you have to ask permission to use the bathroom is prison. So what are they really preparing us for? It's not the real world, it's the rule world. And those bells. The bells are the soundtrack of the school system. You live your whole day waiting for that bell. You can't eat till the bell, you can't talk till the bell, you can't leave till the bell. You start to feel like one of Pavlov's dogs, trained to salivate at the sound of freedom. Ding! You're allowed to move. Ding! You're allowed to learn. Ding! You're allowed to exist again. What a way to raise creative think, conditioning them like they're part of a psychological experiment. Then you've got hall passes. You need a pass to walk down the hallway. A slip of paper that says, this human being has permission to relocate It's absurd. You could be bleeding out, holding your appendix in one hand, and some hall monitor will stop you and say, "Where's your pass?" "Right here. It's written in blood." But no, you can't go to the nurse without that magical square of bureaucracy. And the funny part is, all this rule-making doesn't even make things better. If rules actually worked, schools would be calm, organized utopias. Instead, they're noisy, chaotic, sticky jungles of energy and hormones. You can't control that with clipboards and warning posters. Trying to control teenagers with paperwork is like trying to stop a tornado with a stop sign. There's something deeply human about that need to control, though. Adults don't trust kids to make choices because they assume kids will always make the wrong ones. So they make the choices for them. All of them. What to wear, when to eat, how to walk, when to talk. When they graduate and say, "I'll be independent?" "Oh, sure." After 12 years of conditioning to ask permission for everything, suddenly I'm supposed to be a functioning adult. That's like training a bird in a cage and then yelling at it for not knowing how to fly. And that's where the comedy really lives, in the contradictions. Schools say they want you to be a thinker, but not that kind of thinker. They want creativity, but only if it fits in the rubric. They want individuality, but only if it matches the uniform. You can express yourself as long as you express yourself quietly, neatly, and within regulation guidelines. It's like trying to dance inside a phone booth. Ever notice that every rule has a punishment attached, but almost none have a purpose attached? Don't be late. Detention. Don't talk back. Detention. But don't forget your homework. Detention. I swear if you breathe too loud, there's probably a detention for that too. Nobody stops to ask, "Hey, why is this a problem?" They just go straight to punishment. Schools are like factories that manufacture guilt. And it starts early too. The little kids get a timeout. You ever think about what that means? The timeout. Like life itself is a game and you've been benched for being too alive. What's the message there? You were having too much fun. Now sit in the corner and reflect on your joy. Then by high school, they've upgraded the punishment to in-school suspension, which is basically a sit in a room and stare at the wall. They could save money by just calling it existence. And there's always that one teacher who takes the rules way too seriously. The self-appointed sheriff of the school. They live for that moment when they catch someone chewing gum. Aha! You! Spit it out! They act like they just caught a spy. Calm down, detective. It's a piece of juicy fruit, not contraband. These people should be studied by scientists. How do you take that much pleasure in enforcing nonsense? But again, it's all part of that illusion of control. We'll do what we say because we said so. That's all it ever is. All the policies, procedures, and disciplinary actions boil down to one thing. We're in charge, but you can't say that out loud. It would sound too honest. So instead, you wrap it into learning outcomes and behavioral frameworks. You create the illusion of fairness with language so sterile it could pass a medical test. The beauty of humor is it breaks that illusion. When you laugh at it, you see it for what it is. A big shiny wall of words designed to hide insecurity. Because no one confident in their authority needs to sound like a policy manual. Real confidence speaks simply. It doesn't need 12 syllables to say a stop. And maybe that's the point. Maybe all that language is the nervous chatter of a system that knows it doesn't really understand people. So it keeps talking, keeps defining, keeps regulating until the words pile so high that nobody can see what's underneath. But words can't hide reality forever. You can't bureaucratize human nature. Kids will still talk, laugh, run, and question, no matter how many behavioral expectations you print in bold. Life doesn't read the memo. And when that bell rings and the hallways fill with voices again, all that official language melts away. Because for all their rules and regulations, the simplest truth remains, people don't live by policies, they live by instincts. You ever notice that school is the only place in the world where being rebellious is considered a symptom? Anywhere else, it's personality. In school, it's a problem. The kid who asks why too much isn't curious. He's a disruptive. The girl who finishes early and doodles on her paper isn't creative. She's off task. Everything that makes you interesting gets written up like a crime report. It starts small. First grade, you get told to sit in a straight line. They don't even care where you're going. They just want that line straight. Because nothing says educational like geometric obedience. You're 6 years old and they're already teaching you to stand in formation like you're waiting for inspection. The teacher yells and no talking. And you look around like, we're in school. Isn't that the point? But that's how it works. The whole system is built on the idea that the less you act like yourself, the better you'll do. The quiet kids are a model students. The loud kids are a concern. And the ones who ask, why do we have to do this? Get the classic answer, that because I said so. Ah, yes, the ancient wisdom of the unexplainable. They tell you school prepares you for life. But have you ever had a job where you had to raise your hand to go to the bathroom? If you did, you probably quit that job. School doesn't prepare you for life. It prepares you for compliance. It trains you to wait, to obey, to stand in line for permission to be human. But the funny thing is, no matter how many rules they make, the rebellion still slips through. It's built into human wiring. You tell a kid, don't touch that, and the first thing they do is touch that. It's curiosity dressed as defiance. And schools hate that, because curiosity is unpredictable. It doesn't fit neatly between the bell schedule and the standardized test. So they call it misbehavior. But most of what they call misbehavior is just energy. Pure, unfiltered life energy. You take a bunch of kids, stick them in a box for 8 hours, feed them sugar at lunch, and then act shocked when they start bouncing off the walls. That's not rebellion, that's biology. And when they do rebel, it's usually harmless. Funny, even. A little trick, a shortcut, a clever workaround. The kind of thing that in the real world would make you an entrepreneur. But in school, it's a detention slip. You figure out how to pass notes without getting caught. That's social engineering. You memorize the teacher's bathroom schedule to time your escapes. That's strategy. Not strategy. Because deep down, rebellion is proof of life. It's the sound of someone thinking for themselves. A little spark in a system that runs on autopilot. They can't admit it, but when a student finds a loophole, part of them smiles. They remember what it felt like to outsmart the system, if only for a second. Now, don't get me wrong. There are limits. You can't turn the fire alarm and do an art project or stage a protest in the cafeteria over pizza crusts. But within the chaos, there's beauty. The small rebellions, that's where creativity lives. The doodle that becomes a sketch, the joke that becomes a story, the sarcastic comment that turns into a thought. That's how imagination sneaks past the guards. And schools, for all their rule books, can't stop it. Because rebellion isn't about defiance. It's about expression. It's about saying, I exist beyond your system. It's the human spirit's way of stretching its legs. That's why even the best behaved kids find little ways to push back. Rolling their eyes, whispering in class, writing secret notes, tapping rhythms on the desk. That's not defiance. That's life trying to remind itself that it's alive. Every generation has its own version of rebellion. In the old days, it was talking in class or chewing gum. Then came long hair, baggy clothes, rock music. The details change, but the idea never does. Young people testing limits, asking questions, refusing to fit perfectly in the mold. And every generation of adults panics like it's the end of civilization. These kids have no respect. Yeah, neither did you when you were their age. Respect isn't something you're born with. It's something you trade for authenticity once you're old enough to fake a smile. And that's the punchline. The same people who once snuck out of class are now enforcing attendance policies. The same ones who used to doodle in the margins are grading neatness. It's a cycle of rebellion and reform. Each generation thinks they're fixing the last one, but all they're really doing is making new rules for the next group to break. Because rules are temporary. Rebellion is permanent. It's evolution with a sense of humor. Every rule creates its own rebel, like nature's law of comedy. Tell a kid a no, and you've just written the script for a new idea. Tell a student to sit still, and they'll start tapping out a rhythm that turns into music. Tell them to stop daydreaming, and they'll start writing stories in their heads. You can't stop it, you can only slow it down. That's why rebellion isn't a problem, it's a sign that learning is happening. Real learning doesn't come from memorizing. It comes from questioning. From trying, failing, ignoring, exploring. From finding your own way, even when it's the wrong way. Some of the smartest people I ever met weren't the ones who got gold stars. They were the ones who figured out how to survive without needing them. You know, the kid who always finishes tests early, then turns the paper into a paper airplane. That's not a failure of discipline. That's efficiency. The system just doesn't know how to grade it. And maybe that's the problem. Schools have grades for everything except imagination. They'll grade your handwriting, your posture, your participation, even your silence, but not your ability to think for yourself. Because thinking for yourself can't be measured. It doesn't fit in a rubric, it's messy. It's rebellious. And yet, that's what really matters in life. Knowing when to listen and when to question, when to follow the rule and when to rewrite it. That's the line every student learns to walk, whether they know it or not. Some learn it through arguments, some through mistakes, and some through laughter. But everyone learns it eventually. Authority can give you knowledge, but only rebellion gives you wisdom. And if you're lucky, one day you'll look back and laugh at how serious it all seemed. The hall passes, the dress codes, the zero-tolerance policies. You'll realize it was all just training wheels for adulthood. Where the rules are even weirder, but you finally get to decide which ones to break. Because that's what growing up really is, learning to choose your rebellions. You can't fight everything. You pick your battles. You learn when to say a no, when to walk away, and when to stand your ground. And if you do it right, you'll never lose that spark, that little voice in your head that says, I don't think it has to be this way. That's the voice of freedom wrapped in sarcasm. So yeah, schools can keep their codes, their manuals, their laminated signs. They can try to standardize everything from your shoes to your thoughts, but they'll never completely win. Because somewhere in every classroom there's a kid leaning back in their chair, smirking at the absurdity of it all, quietly plotting a better way to do things. And that's the kid who's going to change the world. Not by breaking every rule, but by understanding which ones were never worth following in the first place.